Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear us. Leslie, you can hear us, right? Awesome. So my name is Sonia, and this is Michelle. And like Leslie said, we both work at Kumabe HR. So Kumabe HR, we're an HR consulting and staffing organization. So we basically partner with various companies across the island and try to help them find the best people for their open positions. We also do HR consulting for various organizations as well. So a few different lines of business, but we're definitely very involved in the staffing side. So we are very excited and happy to be here today to share some tips on resume writing, interviewing skills as well. So hopefully you find it all helpful. I know we can't see you all, but I know that some of you probably already have a resume. I know that resumes can be intimidating, right? And it's always going to be a work in progress. So wherever you are in your resume process, hopefully we can help you out. And feel free to ask us questions again, like Leslie said. Did you want to add anything else, Michelle?
I don't think so. Just congratulations to all of you, class of 2020.
Yeah.
That's such a big accomplishment. I know it didn't go the way you were hoping, but I'm hoping you're making the most of it, and we're really glad to have you here today.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and turn off our video just so that you can kind of focus on the slides themselves, on the content. And then we can open it back up or turn it back on towards the end so that we can really answer your questions if there are any. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. Awesome. Okay, so resume and interviewing. So what is a resume? So essentially, a resume is a statement of why you're qualified for a particular job. It's really kind of a snapshot of who you are, you know, what your experience is like, and what you're looking for, right? And so if you're applying for a particular job, you definitely want to kind of edit and shape and tailor your resume for that particular position. So overall, you know, your resume should really be this document or statement that tells the potential employer who you are, what you've done, and how and why you're qualified for the job that you're applying for. So a few really important things to remember about a resume. Sometimes a resume might be your first and only sometimes impression. Hopefully it's not your only one, but it's definitely going to be the first impression a lot of the time. So when you're applying for the job, you know, the first thing you're going to do is go ahead and send over your resume. So for that reason, you really want to make sure that it's the best representation of who you are and what you've done. And, you know, we say that sometimes 20 seconds is all you've got. And what that means is, you know, as recruiters, we go through so many resumes on a daily basis. So we really, we want to be able to look at the resume and know in a very short time, you know, what you're looking for and what your experience is like. So that's why, you know, you want to make sure that it's attractive. And by that, we mean, you know, it's legible, it's clear, there's a flow to it. And you also, I mean, maybe it sounds silly or obvious, but you always want to make sure that you double check for errors. And that means spelling, grammar, dates, names as well. You really want to make sure that's accurate because unfortunately, sometimes one tiny mistake when it comes to a spelling error can really make or break an opportunity for you. So it's really important, and that's on every level, whether you're, you know, it's your first time applying for a job, or you're finding, you know, you're a manager trying to switch a job or an industry. You'd be surprised how many spelling errors we see and how many times it's kind of worked against the candidate. So always make sure you double check for that. Okay, so we're going to go into detail on all of these parts of the layout of the resume, but we just wanted to kind of give you an overview. And, you know, visually, this is what it's going to look like from the top down. So at the very top, and we're going to show you examples as well, so don't worry. And, you know, we're going to make sure you have those resources too, so that you can refer to that later as well. But at the very top, you know, you want your contact information. Followed by your objective or your statement of what you're looking for and why. And then you want to list your education, followed by your experience, You also want to list any extracurricular activities or volunteering that you might be doing. And then you also want to list some skills. And lastly, on a separate piece of paper, you do want to list, at least 3 references, but ideally 5. And we're going to talk about all of this in detail as well, but that's kind of the overall layout.
Okay, so I'm gonna start you all off with the first thing that should be on your resume right at the top. And I just wanna let you know any of the advice that we give, or in terms of formatting, like the point size or like bolding, italicizing, it is all up to your preference. So you can play with all of these tools we're kind of mentioning today to craft it to a way that you think it looks appealing. So first, again, we're going to do the contact information. So you really want to make it easy for the recruiter or company to contact you. So your name, we suggest maybe 16-point font and bolded. It should be one of the biggest things on your resume, because we want to know what your name is. We want to know who you are. That's really important. So and under your name under your name, you should have the following information. You can play with it how you want. You can stack them on top of each other, or you can put them all in one line. But you want to include your phone number and your email. So with those 2 things, we really want to make sure that your voicemail is professional. I know sometimes we create our voicemail and we forget about it because we don't hear it on a daily basis. So you really want to go in and check what your voicemail is, just to make sure it's something professional. You don't want any of those kind of joking voicemails where it's like, hello, and then you pause and then they start talking and then you're like, just kidding, leave a voicemail, like those kinds of voicemails. You really want to keep it professional. You want to keep it to like your name, please leave a message, and then just end it at that. And also for your email, something easy you could do is just go with your name, do different variations like your first initial and last name, first name and last initial, or any of those variations. But again, you want to make sure it's professional for when the recruiter company is trying to contact you. And lastly, you want to include a visual separator. So you want to be able to see the difference between your contact information and the rest of your resume. So next is an example. So again, I just want to let you guys know this is not a real person. Marie is a real person, but all of the information is really just examples for you folks. So don't read into it or anything. It's just made up for example. So I don't know if you guys want to unmute yourself or anything, but I just want to see if any of you can catch the mistake on the slide. Anyone see it? That's okay. Well, what was that?
I'm kind of guessing that you're linking the LinkedIn, maybe. I don't know.
Like that you shouldn't include your LinkedIn, or?
I don't know. I've never really been on LinkedIn before, but I would think of that as like something like.
No problem. I know we didn't mention it in the last slide, but your LinkedIn is optional. If you don't have a LinkedIn already, I would maybe go on and explore it. It's a really good place to start if you want to kind of build your network in terms of professional network. But that's another discussion. If you have any more questions about LinkedIn, we can definitely talk to you about it, but we'll just get back to the example. So what we're missing here is the last digit in the phone number. So this phone number only includes 9 digits, and you should always remember to have 10. So area code. So your area code, then the 7 digits of your phone number. So you don't want to, you want to make sure that your phone number is correct. Otherwise, they won't be able to contact you for the opportunity, even if you are a really good qualified candidate. So of course, we're going to be mentioning this a lot, but always proofread and make sure all of your information is correct. Okay, so moving on to the objective. So this is going to sit right under your right under your contact information, so below that visual separator. And what an objective is, it's gonna be really short, 1 to 2 sentences, and this is gonna be an area of, or a summary of your area of expertise, or what you can bring to the table and what you can bring to the company, as well as your career interests or where you hope to go by getting this position or applying for this position. So you want to be very specific, especially if you're applying for a particular position. In the next example that we have, it'll give the title and the company and all of that, so it'll be a lot easier to see. But if you are applying to something more general, you want to make the statement more general if you're just trying to get a job within the organization. So here's that example I talked about. For this person, their objective is to obtain a management trainee position with Ulani Hotel, offering exceptional leadership, customer care, and clerical expertise to ensure efficient company operations. So in their objective, they're applying for a specific position, so they put that in there, the management trainee position at the Hale Kulani Hotel, which is the organization. And in the last sentence, they talk about what they have to offer. So all of those things: exceptional leadership, customer care, and clerical expertise. So it's really short, but it's very concise. So it tells them what you're trying to do and what you can contribute for this to their company. Okay, and moving on, we're gonna talk about the education. So being that you guys just graduated from high school, you're gonna be putting the name, you wanna include the name of your high school, the city and state where your high school is located, as well as your expected graduation month and year. But because you guys already graduated, you can just put your graduation and then the month and the year. You may also want to include under education your GPA if you received above a 3.0, and any scholarships that you received while you were in high school, any awards, as well as if you were a part of any athletics teams. And here's an example. This one is of their college education, but the Schuyler College of Business, University of Hawaii at Manoa is the institution. So on the right-hand side, you have the dates that you attended that school. Below that is the location. And because you guys just graduated from high school, you don't have to put any degree there, and then just your graduation date at the bottom. Okay, and moving on, we're gonna go to experience. So this is where you're gonna put anything that you've done in terms of like your professional work experience. So what you want to include in this section is the name of the company, also include the city and state, as well as the month and year of when you worked there. And you should also put in your position, as well as listing the duties and accomplishments. So here is an example. So their first position here is American Eagle Outfitters. They included the company name. Under that is their position title, as well as the details of what they did and anything they did to improve improve the company through their position. And on the right-hand side, you have the dates as well as the location. So again, with the formatting, you can take a look at this one. You can do it the same way, or you can play with the different formatting tools to make it more appealing to what you think looks good. So we also have a few tips for this section as well. The way you want to organize your experience is in reverse chronological order. So your most recent job, or the job that you're currently holding, at the top. This way it makes it easier for recruiters to tell what your timeline of jobs look like. You don't want it to be all jumbled. You want to make it really easy to read. And with the easy to read, you want to make sure you bullet your details instead of writing incomplete sentences. This makes it easier to read, less clutter on the page. So you really want to be concise with all of your details. And with the details, you also want to put the most important and relevant aspects of your job first. So if you're applying for like a restaurant job, you can put in any details that kind of relate to like customer service or your ability to multitask, things like that you have done in your previous jobs as well. And a way you can elevate your resume is to use power verbs to describe your productivity and duties. So these include like completed, generated, streamlined, maximized. You can also Google power verbs, and then you can take a look at that list. But please do make sure that you know what the word means and how to use it. You don't want to be caught using like words you don't really understand in your resume or using them wrong on your resume. So just make sure you understand how to use the words before you put them on your resume too. And you also want to avoid using pronouns like I, me, and I'm sorry, did someone have a question? No? Okay. So you want to avoid using pronouns like I, me, and my. So we have an example under there. So instead of using I welcomed all incoming guests, instead of using the I welcomed all incoming guests, you can say something like you can bullet this point and say something like provided excellent customer service to all guests. So that way it makes it more concise and it really sounds a lot better in terms of your duties. So you also don't want to use complete sentences again. Like I said, it does fill up your page very quickly if you use full sentences. So you want to cut down on the number of words you're using to describe your tasks and duties. Okay. And next, Sonia is going to talk about activities.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. So Michelle covered a lot of really important parts of the resume. And, the experience is going to be like, as you gather more experience, that's really going to be, I guess you could call like the meaty part of your resume, right? So that's going to be really important to get down. So hopefully those tips were helpful, but so let's move on to activities. So if you are not involved in something, definitely don't join anything that you're not passionate about. But we definitely recommend getting involved somehow in something, whether it's like through school, or outside of school, any type of volunteering or any type of membership. It's just a great way to show that you're involved in other types of activities outside of school. And it's also, a great opportunity to use that experience to talk about in an interview, for example. If you don't have that much job experience, maybe you do have a lot of other experience in an extracurricular activity that could still speak to your skills and your ability to do well in the job that you're applying for. So if you are involved in something, you've got to list it on your resume because recruiters and hiring managers love to see that. So when you do list it, make sure you list the organization or the company name, as well as the role or the position that you serve in it. Even if it's just a member, you just want to make it clear that you're a member of that group. And you can like bold or italicize. There's all different ways to kind of format and distinguish that information. But you definitely want to list that. And if it is through school, you can definitely list it under your education section on the resume. It can kind of vary, right? So as you get more experiences, maybe you can kind of separate them. So the ones that are, connected with school, you list it under education, and then anything outside of school, you could list it under this separate section, extracurriculars or activities. And then always, you do want to mark the months and the dates of your membership or affiliation. Sometimes if you have like a leadership role, for example, people are going to want to know exactly what you do or what you've done. So you can add a couple bullets, just like with the experience section. You can add a couple bullets just briefly describing what you do and what you're responsible for. So again, it's a really great way to kind of boost your resume, this activity section. So let's take a look at an example. So, on Marie's example resume, we have secretary for Society of Human Resource Management. Secretary is, of course, her role, and then that's the SHRM, or Society of Human Resource Management, is the name of the organization. And we see the dates on the right-hand side. So in this particular example, we don't have any bullets that are describing the roles, but like I said, it's really up to you. It also might depend on how much room you have, right? Like if you have a good amount of experience and skills that's taking up room on your resume, you may not have to elaborate so much. So it's always going to be like a push and pull with this type of thing, but definitely you want to list at least the name of the company and the role that you play in it, or organization, sorry, and then the dates as well. Okay, awesome. So let's move on to skills. So it's going to be really important that as you gather and develop your skills, you list it on your resume. So definitely, you want to see computer skills on there. So if you've ever used like Microsoft Word, for example, or PowerPoint in school or in some other activity, you definitely want to list it on there. However, just like we put here on the slide, it's probably better to only list skills, especially when it comes to computer skills, if you actually feel very comfortable and at the very least proficient with it, right? So you want to be able to talk about it in an interview. If you say that Microsoft Word or Excel, for example, is a skill of yours, they might ask you a question. So it's just better to list skills that you're actually comfortable with and have a good amount of experience in. And then as you practice and develop other skills, you can add those on too. Language skills are always going to be attractive on a resume. So even if it's, just reading and writing or speaking as well, you want to distinguish that. You want to mark that down. And then, for the language part of skills, you can put your level. So even if it's basic or conversational, sometimes that's a great boost to your resume. It may not be a requirement for the job, but maybe in the industry, it might be a great supplement to your job duties, that they see that you're, conversational Japanese, for example, might look really great on your resume. So don't be afraid to mark any language skills that you have on this section. And lastly, of course, if you have anything else, like if you're CPR certified, maybe first aid certified. I know for me personally, I used to work a lot in the restaurant industry and the food business. So I always had my food safety certificate and I would list that on my resume with the expiration date. So those are kind of like miscellaneous skills that you might have that could look really great on your resume as well. Here's another example. So proficient in Microsoft Office Suite, listing all the programs in Microsoft Office that they're comfortable in, basic first aid and CPR certified, and basic Japanese and French language skills. Okay, so references. So references are really important. We do recommend that, on your resume, you want to just make sure that on your resume, you have all the information that we already went over. And at the very bottom, you can just put references available upon request. Usually we kind of like center it and italicize it. You can kind of decide on your own how you think it looks best, but that is kind of what we recommend. And then on a separate document, you can have your list of references. Definitely 3 minimum is always good to have. Having 5 is probably safe, and you always want to make sure that you have their name jotted down, I don't know about if their address is always necessary, but definitely their contact information, right? Like their phone number, their email, and you want to mark down their relationship to you. So if they were your manager maybe, or your employer in a past job, or if they're your counselor, maybe they're a teacher that you work with a lot, that you feel like they can really speak to your character and the type of work ethic that you have. So it could be a variety of options for the references, but those are definitely some good ideas. And if you have questions about that too, we can always talk about that, but just be sure to have that ready on a separate document. And lastly, it's really important that you let your references know ahead of time that they are your reference, right? So if you're applying for a job and they want to call a reference and find out, from a past employer what your work ethic is like, or if you're always on time, maybe timeliness is super important for the job. I mean, it's important for every job, but just as an example, you want to make sure that the reference they're calling knows that they're your reference. So make sure you let them know ahead of time. Okay. So here's another example. Marie kept her contact information at the top. That's always helpful, but you can see here we have the name of the reference, the relationship to them. So they were their manager at Duraku Sushi, their phone number, and then their email address. Okay, so we went over the main sections of the resume, so we just want to do a quick review. So always remember to be consistent, and this includes verb tenses, meaning like anything that's a past experience, you want to make sure that you add that ed, you make it past tense, right? And if it's a current job, you want to make sure it's present tense. That might sound silly, but I can't tell you how many resumes I see that's not consistent with the tenses, and hiring managers really don't like to see that. Be consistent with the formatting. You know, if you're bolding a company name, make sure that you're bolding all company names throughout the document. Always check your names and dates, make sure they're accurate. Make sure your spelling and grammar, like we keep saying, is always, you know, accurate and correct. And then, you know, if you want to be really proactive, take a look at the job posting and the job description of what you're applying for, and you might see some key words in that job description that you could use in your own resume. So of course, this is going to be a work in progress to practice, right? You don't want to just copy and paste certain words or phrases, but you definitely want to be able to know some of the skills maybe or words that they're looking for the job, and make sure that it's reflected somehow on your resume. And we can talk more about that later too if you have questions, but these are kind of like the 4 reminders for resumes.
Okay, thanks Sonia for going over all those parts and giving us those reminders. Lastly, for the resumes, we want to give you our overall resume tips. So first is to keep it to 1 page. So I know you may not have a lot of experience right now, but as you gain more experience, you're going to be expanding on your resume and including everything, all the great stuff that you've kind of developed. So you want to keep it to 1 page and take out whatever is not relevant to the position that you're applying for. So again, you really want to cater each resume to the position that you apply for. And you can keep a running list of all of the experiences and all of your experiences on 1 page, but when you are creating a specific resume for a certain job, you want to make sure you take out things that aren't really relevant to what you're trying to achieve. And again, I know we've been saying this a lot, but be consistent. Like Sonia said, with your tenses and with your formatting on your resume, it just overall makes your resume look a lot clearer and a lot more easy to look at. In terms of for the recruiters. So you really want to make it look attractive. And although we do say you want to include as much information as you can, you do want to keep some white space on your resume. You don't want to have it too cluttered or too bare. So a tip we gave you earlier was to bullet your points instead of using full sentences. So this will reduce the number of words on the page because that can get very cluttered very quickly. So just be very concise with your words. And again, with the formatting, you can emphasize certain information by bolding or italicizing certain words. And you can use power verbs to elevate your resume, again, when you're describing your duties and your achievements. And so important, we want to end with this one: proofread, and make sure, if you have the chance, to have others look at it, because you may look over things that others will catch. So any help that you can get with taking a look at your resume is going to be great, so you don't have any mistakes when you do send in the final product. So those were all the tips we had for resume writing. We hope that was helpful for you. And again, if you have any questions at the end, we'll be happy to answer those for you, but we'll be moving on to interviewing tips now. So as you all have graduated already, you'll probably be either looking for a new job or looking for a job, or you'll be going back to school, but interviewing tips are very helpful in any of those kinds of situations. So we're gonna give you some of our top tips. So that's what we want to start with today, our top 5 interviewing tips. First is to always do research on your company and to know your stuff. So it's really impressive when candidates come into an interview and they're prepared and they already know a little bit about like what the company does, what their culture is like, what their values are. And Sonia's going to go over more of how you can do that and ways you can do research on your company in the next slide. But our second tip is to dress appropriately. So I think a good rule of thumb for when you're dressing for an interview is to take a look at what the employees wear on a regular basis, and then kind of do one step up from there in terms of how dressed up they are. So, and for sure, for interviews, you don't want to wear anything too low cut. You don't want to wear anything too casual like jeans and slippers. Just make sure you dress more conservatively than you normally would. And number 3 is to have 2 to 3 questions prepared for the interviewer. So at the end of every interview, the interviewer is going to ask you, do you have any questions for me? And it's really great when candidates are able to be like, yes, these are a few questions that I have prepared for you. Can you answer them for me? This is your opportunity to learn more about the company. This is really for you to get to know whether it's going to be a right fit for you or not as well. So you can even turn it on the interviewer and ask, like, what do you enjoy most about your job? Or what do you enjoy most about this company? So it's really, you shouldn't see it as something that's kind of testing you. It's more for you to be able to learn more about the company. And number 4 is to always be ready to answer the tell me about yourself question. This is always one of the first questions that interviewers will ask you. And although you shouldn't memorize any answers, you should have a few points that you feel comfortable talking about yourself. And just to kind of give an overview of what you are, of you basically, like you can say that you are a recent graduate and what you kind of hope to be, or what your goals are. Those are kind of good places to start when you're answering this question. And number 5 is to be yourself. This is really big because the employer is trying to see whether you're going to be a right fit for the company in terms of the culture, in terms of the job, and for yourself. You don't want to be portraying yourself a certain way because they're looking for a certain person that will fit in with their company culture. So it's not going to be beneficial for either parties if you're acting a certain way just because you want to get the job, because once you do get it, it may not be for you either because you kind of put yourself in a position where it made it seem like you would be the perfect fit for the job. So be yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. So Michelle's already given you a ton of really great tips. I'm going to give you a few more. So when it comes to like doing your homework, doing your research, it's so important before the job interview. So look up the company, just Google them, use the internet, go to their website, check out their history. Maybe it might be really interesting. Check out their mission. Sometimes you can find out a lot about a company from their mission statement, and you can actually see even from that sometimes if it kind of aligns with your own values or what you're passionate about. I also recommend looking up their About Us page, and kind of, every company should kind of have maybe some bios of their top leaders or their executives. It really helps you to get a bigger picture understanding of the company itself and kind of who they are, what their work culture is like. Sometimes their websites can show you a lot about their work culture, and you can find out if that's something that looks great to you or maybe is not the best fit for you. So definitely explore the website. Don't be afraid to do that. And that might help you generate and formulate some of the questions that Michelle was saying to prepare for the interviewer. So you never know what might come from your research as well. So of course, use the internet. You can use anyone around you, any peers, even people in the industry. Maybe sometimes someone who has worked in the company and in the past, or maybe they don't know that particular company, but they're familiar with the industry in general. They could still give you some really great tips for the interview. So don't be afraid to kind of use your network and ask around. One thing we didn't list on here is if you do have a LinkedIn, you can also use LinkedIn to do some research on the company as well, and kind of find out what other people are saying about the company. If you search the internet, you might find some of the larger companies are also in the news. You never know what you might find, right? So just do some research. It might help you a lot. And then, of course, know the job responsibilities. So that might sound silly, but you want to be careful to actually read exactly what is expected of you in the job that you're applying for. So the reason that this is important is because they might ask you a question based on your resume or just based on the job duties, that they want to find out, are you capable of completing a certain task or being able to do a part of the job. And if you're not completely familiar with the job duties itself, that might reflect poorly on your preparation for the interview, right? So you always want to make sure you know exactly what you're trying to sign up for and what you're getting into. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you link it all together, right? So you want to be able to use your research to answer the question of why you're qualified and why you want the job itself. And be able to kind of link your resume to your answers, right? Like pull from your resume the skills, your experience, any, personality characteristics that you think you have that would really serve you well in the job to answer these questions, and tie it all in together with your research, because I think you'll find that it's going to help you prepare a lot. So practice, practice, practice. This is true for, of course, everything in life, right? That might be a little bit difficult, but you want to make sure that you feel very prepared in your answers. And that doesn't mean memorizing your answers, because the interviewer is definitely going to be able to tell if you've memorized an answer or if you're genuinely answering the question, right? So even if you're not memorizing, just be comfortable with the main ideas and the main topics that they might be asking you about. So be comfortable talking about your own strengths and weaknesses and how it might relate to the job. This is how you prepare in advance, so that even if they do ask you a question that you haven't specifically heard of or prepared for beforehand, you might, from your other answers, be able to answer that question as well, because you've prepared and practiced so much. That even goes with like the flow of just speaking to somebody. So don't be afraid to kind of, talk slowly if you really want to get your point across and all of that. And practice helps with that too. And then try to think of specific examples too from your experiences that show, your dependability, your ability to work in a team and collaborate, or your work ethic. If you just work really, really hard, make sure you practice some stories that you can think of from your experiences for your answers. And then sometimes it might help to write your answers down and practice it out loud. I know for me personally, when I write things down, it sticks in my brain better. Everyone's different, everyone learns differently, but that's definitely one way that might help you practice. Look in the mirror, see how you look answering the question. You always want to make sure you're smiling. I think we've talked about that, or we will as well. But that's important as well. And then use your resources, like use your friends or your family to practice with too. Okay, so we're going to go into some interview do's and don'ts. So I'll go over some do's. So for your interview, do find out the exact time and place of the interview. It's really important that you leave, at least 10 to 15 minutes beforehand. So you want to arrive early, just in case, what if you can't find a parking spot and you got to park somewhere else, then you'll make it right on time. But if you didn't give yourself that room beforehand, you might be a little bit late, which of course doesn't reflect well on you either for the interview. So if you arrive early and all goes well, then you have a few minutes to kind of breathe, relax, think about what you want to say, put a smile on your face, drink some water maybe. So it's really important that you know exactly where you're going and you show up a little bit early. Do research the company. Like I said, it's going to reflect really well and they're going to be able to tell during the interview. It's very impressive. Do be neat in your appearance. I know Michelle has already touched on that. Being professional in the way that you dress says a lot about, your work ethic and how you view yourself as well. And so that's really important as well. Do bring copies of your resume. I know everything is, digital nowadays, right? So they should have it, but you never know. Sometimes another executive might drop in to your interview. It might be unexpected. I know that's happened to me before. And you always want to make sure that you come prepared so that you have extra copies in case they need it. And then do think through your response before answering. I think this is really important. I know that when you're nervous during an interview, it's very easy to talk fast, to kind of just, you want to get it over with, right? You just want to get your answer out. But I think what's really important is to remember that it's okay to pause for a minute. You can even ask, you can say, can I just have a minute to think about that question? I really want to make sure that my response is really going to address your question. So it's okay to ask for some time. I know the silence might be a little bit awkward, but in the long term, that's really going to help you, because those few seconds might be what you need to kind of collect yourself and remember what you wanted to say. So do think through your response. Don't jump to anything and take your time with it as well. Michelle's gonna go over some don'ts.
Okay, so for the don'ts, our first don't is don't chew gum. So this is very important because when you're chewing gum, it makes it harder for you to talk. It makes it harder for people to understand you. And of course, you don't want any incidents where your gum comes flying out of your mouth in the middle of a response, because that's all the interviewer is going to remember about you, is you're the person whose gum fell out of their mouth. So that's not going to reflect well on you either. So don't chew gum, and don't go on talking and talking. So you really want to, again, like with your resume, you want to be very concise with your answers. And sometimes when you go rambling on and on, you forget what the question even was initially. So you really want to, again, take what Sonia said in the do's, take the time to think through your response, and don't just talk because you don't really have an answer. You really want to think it through and be concise with your answers. And next is don't bring up the subject of pay. It's not necessarily that it's something that you should never talk about. There is a right time and place, but the interview is not the right place. Maybe once they do offer you the position, you can bring up the subject of pay and maybe have a discussion about it. But in the interview is more of a chance for them to get to know you and why you would be a good candidate for this position. It's not the place to talk about pay. And next, don't badmouth your boss, peers, or anyone. This is a really good rule of thumb for anything, especially in Hawaii. I know we all know how small Hawaii is, so it will come back around and bite you in the butt, because someone's going to hear that you're talking bad about maybe one of their peers or one of their friends, and that's not going to reflect well on you, and it may even affect whether you get hired for the job or not. So you really don't want to badmouth anyone, no matter how bad your experience was with them. And another don't is don't swear. It does kind of reflect poorly on your professionalism if you swear in an interview. The workplace isn't really somewhere you should be swearing in general, so they really don't want to see you doing it in front of someone you're trying to impress. So think of other alternatives where you can use instead of swearing. Maybe just an or even silence is better than swearing. So our last don't is don't be afraid to ask questions. Again, we brought up the bring 2 to 3 questions for the end of the interview, but if anything they ask you, you're a little confused about, please do ask questions about it. Like if you don't understand what the question is, you can say, I'm sorry, can you rephrase that question? I don't quite understand what you're trying to ask. It's better than asking the question is better than answering a question they didn't ask, you know? So definitely don't be afraid to ask any questions. So those are our do's and don'ts. And just because of COVID-19 and how everything is kind of shifting in terms of interviews and having in-person interviews, we wanted to talk about telephone interviews, because you may run into this because companies aren't conducting in-person interviews. So we wanted you to be prepared in case this does come up. So our first tip is to make sure you are in a quiet place or quiet space. So you don't want anything interrupting you while you're in the middle of your call. You don't just make sure you let your family, if you do live with your family, any siblings, any pets, just make sure they're not in the room when you are around the time that your interview is supposed to happen. This becomes really distracting if there is any background noise, so make sure you're in a quiet place. And 2 is to be prepared. Again, you should prepare all of the same ways you would for an in-person interview, just this time it's going to be over the phone. So you always want to prepare even though you're not physically looking at anyone when you are doing the interview. And this one seems kind of intuitive, but you shouldn't take other calls when you are in your interview. You don't want to be hanging up on your interviewer to take another call, because they're probably not going to give you a call back and not going to give you another chance for that interview. So you don't want anything distracting you, so you should not be taking any other calls while you're on your interview. And another tip is to lay out any materials you need to help you answer any questions. So this may be a pro of telephone interviews, but you are able to have something in front of you that you can look at in terms of notes and your answers. Of course, again, don't memorize any answers, but just be comfortable with any notes that you have and just talking about it. So make sure you set enough time aside. You don't want to be cutting your interviewer off short because you scheduled something immediately after you thought the interview was supposed to end. You want to set out a good amount of time, probably at least an hour time. Don't schedule anything within that hour, just to make sure that you aren't interrupted during your interview. Another tip is to smile. They can hear it in your voice. It's definitely true over the phone. You want to sound interested, you want to sound engaged, and smiling will do that for you. No one wants to talk, or when people interview over the phone, you really can only hear expressions through the tone in their voice. So smiling makes you sound a lot more interested in the position. So just smile, because it really does make a difference. And lastly, you should dress the part. I know it sounds really strange for you to dress up in your house to do a phone interview, but it really does help when you're able to get kind of dressed up to as if you're going to a real interview, because that's what it is. So it really puts you in the mindset of being professional and just being more focused if you are dressed for the part. So those are our tips on telephone interviews.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Michelle. So one of the last things, or the last thing we are going to cover, is common interview questions. So these are some really common questions that you might get during an interview. We also have, if you want a more comprehensive list, we can definitely, provide that for you. But here are just a few that we wanted to highlight. So like we said earlier, tell me about yourself is a very common way to kind of start an interview. And it may sound casual, but they're definitely listening to how you answer that question. So make sure you prepare your response for that type of question. It's a very common one. What makes you a good candidate for this job? Again, it sounds kind of simple, but just saying that you want a job definitely, I don't think suffices for a response for this type of question, right? So just given everything that we've kind of talked about, doing your research, really expanding on your resume and your skills, and looking at what you can offer the job and the company will help you answer this kind of question. Another common question will be, can you give me 3 strengths, or can you give me 3 weaknesses that you think you might have? Those might be separate questions. The weakness question is not as common, I think, as it used to be, but every interviewer is different. So it's just definitely a question to be prepared for. And these types of questions can be very difficult, I know. I mean, strengths, of course, is a place for you to kind of, don't be humble. Definitely show off whatever you think you're very skilled at, list it as a strength. The weaknesses, I think it's important to make sure that in your weakness answer, you always follow up with how you are working on it and how you plan to improve what you consider a weakness. And of course, be cautious of the types of weaknesses that you choose, right? Like saying that you're lazy probably isn't the best weakness to list, but saying that, you're working on your time management because you have when you have a lot of duties that you're working on simultaneously, sometimes it takes very advanced time management to be able to do all of that efficiently. So that's something that you can say, I've been working on my time management. I'm using a journal or a pen and paper to kind of mark down what I have to do and put a timeline on it, right? So that's kind of an example of the way to end the weakness question to make sure that it still leaves a great impression. Another common interview question would be, tell me about a time you went above and beyond your responsibilities. I think this question is great because it can be very vague, meaning that you can apply your answer. Your answer can be applied to really any type of experience that you have. So this doesn't have to just be at a job. This could be if you were, doing something for school and group work was really heavy and you went above and beyond your part in the group work and you really took a leadership role. That could be a great example as well. Just make sure you're able to kind of explain the situation and why and how you went above your responsibilities. Another common question would be, can you describe a time you resolved a conflict between you and your peers or with a customer or guest? How did you do this and what was the outcome? So conflict resolution is a huge skill that any employer wants to see in a potential employee, right? So make sure that you really can think of a time. Again, this could be at, during a job, or this could be at school. This could be in an extracurricular activity. Conflicts arise everywhere, right? They're inevitable, but it's all about how you handle them. So make sure that you are prepared with your answer for this type of question. You always want to make sure that, of course, choose a story that is true, but make sure you choose a story that shows a positive outcome, because they want to see that you're able to actually resolve the conflict, not that you were involved in a conflict, because everyone is involved in conflicts, but they want to see how you're able to deal with it. Okay, and a last common question is, tell me about a time you demonstrated leadership skills. Again, this could be from any experience, and again, it's kind of vague, so use that to your advantage. Choose an experience or time that you really feel like you took a leadership role, and just describe that. So those are some common interview questions, and again, there's a lot of other types of questions that they might ask you, but I think if you're prepared for these types of questions, it's a really great foundation for your preparation. So we covered pretty much everything that we wanted to cover. So let me know, I think we'd like to open up the floor now. I don't know if Leslie maybe wants to say a few words, but we're definitely here and willing to answer any questions that you might have.
So thank you so much, Michelle and Sonia, for a great presentation, especially for sharing all of your knowledge and expertise on how to build a resume, how to prepare for an interview. I hope you guys all learned something new. We do have a couple questions in the chat, so I'm going to go through that, and then we'll open it up for you folks to unmute yourself to answer additional questions. The first question is regarding the resume section. If you work for a family member's business, are they an acceptable reference?
I think absolutely they are, because they have seen what you're like. I think that's actually really good, because they can speak on your personal traits as well as your professional traits. So I think absolutely a family member that you've worked for is a great reference.
Okay, great.
I think just to elaborate on that, I think that it's a great reference, and you just want to make sure that the person that you're listing as a reference can really give you a professional reference, right? So you may have like a really close or intimate relationship with them outside of work, but you just want to make sure that they're going to be able to professionally speak on your behalf. So to kind of use that personal relationship to still give a professional reference, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. The next question is also regarding resumes. What if there's nothing you can add onto your resume? So volunteer work, extracurricular activities, either inside or out of school. What would be the best course of action when there is the bare minimum to add?
I mean, I think, I can go. I think that that's okay. I mean, everyone is in a different place in their life, right? So even if you don't have something now to add, it could be a great time, especially if you're graduating, to really reflect on what direction you'd like to go in and look into different groups or organizations that you could get involved with. So it's not going to necessarily mean that you're not going to get a job or your resume is not going to look good. It's just something that can help supplement the content on your resume. So for me personally, I would say that's when you can use formatting and other methods to kind of make sure that your resume still looks full and gives a full picture of who you are. And that's also where it comes in to like not leave too much blank space as well. So sometimes formatting can be your friend if you're trying to fill up some space that, you just don't have that experience yet. But it's totally okay. Like that's not, a super big issue. I don't know if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of employers do understand that you just graduated from high school. You probably don't have too much professional experience yet. So anything that you can add onto your resume, like anything you do in school, you can put any projects that kind of relate to the job, things like that. You can really just take any experiences from school to supplement your resume, because I think a lot of employers do understand that you just graduated and that you're not going to have that much experience on your resume yet, but lots of opportunity to build on that. So like Sonia said, joining clubs, joining groups, volunteering, things like that. There's lots of opportunity to add on to it.
Okay, great. The next question is regarding preparing for an interview. So there's a lot of anxiety when you're preparing for an interview and having to create and execute a confident and clear answer, especially when the interview asks questions. And so if you're a really shy person, do you have any specific tips that they could use to help reduce anxiety? I know you guys shared a little bit about tips that they could do to prepare for an interview, but is there anything, especially for folks that are more on the shyer side and may have a difficult time communicating their answers?
Yeah, definitely. I think we gave a lot of really good tips about how to prepare. And I know I used to be really shy as well coming out of high school, so I totally understand that struggle. But I think with what we said about practicing and just being comfortable with your answers, like asking your family if they can ask you questions and things like that, and just get their feedback on how your answers were. Just talking in front of people really helps you become more comfortable with just having another human being there, whether that, even though that is your family, just having another person there and just vocalizing your answers really helps you become more confident in saying them when it does come the time to do so.
And I think, you know, with all of that being said, I think I think everyone has been there. So, you know, hopefully there are a lot of different types of interviewers out there, but you'd be surprised. A lot of interviewers are very understanding and empathetic. They understand that you're nervous. So if you're nervous and it's showing, it's okay. Like, they know that you're nervous. So it's kind of something that you don't have to be ashamed of, because everyone's been there at one point or another. And if you continue to practice, like Michelle said, it's just a skill that you can develop upon. No one was born an amazing interviewee, right? Everyone had to practice to get to where they are. So I would say definitely just emphasizing the practice part. And if you have an interview that didn't go well and you feel like you just had a lot of anxiety, you know what? That's your practice run. And everyone had that experience. I know I did. I had multiple. So it's okay. And don't be too hard on yourself, because it might happen, and don't let it determine how you view interviews in the future, because just know that everyone's been there.
That's really great advice. So a couple of you asked if we're going to be posting the webinar online, and we will. So I did put, it's going to be on our P20, Hawaii P20 website. So I have a link in the chat. We also have resources for you folks as well on how to create a resume sample, and the common interview questions that Sonia and Michelle went over. So that's also on the web page as well. So we had some really great questions. We have time for a few more if anybody wants to add any into the chat, or if you want to unmute yourselves and ask any questions.
Can your references be like your friends or somebody else?
Sorry, what did you say after that?
Can references be like your friends or cannot?
I'd say as a general rule, probably no. But I mean, if your friend happens to be like, there are exceptions, okay? Like if you're working in a group together in school on a really involved project or something, and your friend somehow really has a lot to say about the work that you did, then maybe. But in general, I would try to stay away from friends as references and stick to, even if it's not like a past boss, just like a mentor, a teacher, a counselor, or even like if you have like maybe like a family friend. I mean, I don't know exactly what kind of friend you mean, but like if it's a family friend who's a professional, maybe in the industry that you're interested in, that could be a reference. But if it's just like your girlfriend that you hang out with every day, probably not.
I think also, you know, you do make friends at work and things like that too. So if they can speak on like how you work, how you are in the workplace and things like that, then friends would work as well as a professional reference if that's the kind of relationship that you two have.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Good question.
Okay, we probably have time. It's 1 o'clock, so we have time for maybe one more question if there's any pressing questions you want to get in before we end.
I have a question. Oh,
Okay, one more question. Go ahead.
Like, was someone going to, or?
Yeah, yes, you can go ahead and ask your question.
What about like portfolio wise? For I'm not really sure. Like say you is it appropriate to also kind of put down a portfolio, like if you're going to like try to like apply for like being a storyboard artist or anything?
An artist.
Sorry, if you're gonna apply for being, okay, yeah. So portfolios. Sorry, you can add on after. I always want to make sure, like, I'm not. I think that if you have some work that you've done, so honestly, I think that's when like a LinkedIn can be really helpful because like you can actually showcase anything that you would put in a portfolio on your online profile on LinkedIn and like actually put a link to it. But you can also maybe list on your resume like the work that you've done. That's something that I think you'd have to play around with. Like it could be in a separate section, but if it's associated with like a certain project or job, then you can list it under that in that section. But you know, if you're submitting a resume digitally, I'm not sure, you know, how if you'd be able to link it, but if you can link it, like, you know, like link it literally, like if they click on it online, that it would take it somewhere. To view your work, then that would be awesome. But if you're printing the resume and handing it out, then, you know, I would at least like mark the type of work that you've done wherever it's appropriate on the resume, if that makes sense. So it's definitely something that you want to communicate that you have, right? So the trick is kind of finding the best way to communicate it. I don't know. Do you have any other?
Yeah. I think in terms of like art, if you are submitting like on your resume, if you created certain pieces in a certain job or in a certain class or anything, you can say like portfolio available upon request, like
Right.
your references. Just because some online jobs don't allow you to attach anything to it, so I'm just making them aware that you do have work that you want to show them if they're interested.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank
Okay. You can always email us and we can help you with your specific work because it's very contextual to each individual as well.
you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So Michelle and Sonia, if you could put your emails in the chat, that would be great. In case people just have questions and want to follow up with you. There was a question in the chat about if they could reach out to you to look over their resume. So
Definitely.
I would say, okay, so if you folks are interested in that, Michelle and Sonia will put in their emails in the chat. I'll also put it on the website so that you can have it there as well. But we're a little after 1, so we're out of time. But want to thank Michelle and Sonia again so much for taking the time to be with us today. And for you class of 2020 graduates, we wish you all the luck as you start preparing for your next steps, whether you're planning to enroll in college or you're going to go and get a job. At least you'll have the necessary skills now and the knowledge on how to prepare an effective resume and also to prepare for your interviews. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.